Thank you very much, Mr. Sardar, and so briefly and succinctly summing up the whole philosophy of your approach to what you do and how you approach things and how you feel this should be done. I said 329. I don't see Rufina here, so we push it a little bit. So let's get a few questions. May I request the questioners to be very brief so that we can get very brief questions and very sharp answers. Yeah, Shank.
I have a quick question to my colleague. Sorry. This microfinance data which was put up there, that 12% is the lending cost and 24%. If you look at typical banking system, which I think you people understand better than me, I suppose 80% cost is the borrowing cost and operational cost is very low. So is it about economy of scale that your costs are so high, or what is it? I was just curious about the costing structure there.
The cost of operations is high because the whole process of microfinance is very labor intensive, and there's not much of technology which has been used so far in the front end, definitely, which is again a very labor intensive process, Secondly, the back end also in terms of transaction processing, most microfinance institutions who graduated from an NGO to a financial institution have a pretty inefficient back-end process, So at Ujjivan, what we try to do is, coming from the banking background, we've tried to centralize our back-end portion and also use the latest technologies to push the cost down. But at the end of the day, the front end, which is so labor intensive, we have to figure out how to cut those costs, and things which we talked about, mobile technology and handheld devices, would probably help us to cut those costs down.
That's what I felt, that technology seems to be probably the solution, because if you bring it down to 3%, then I think the market will 94%, I guess.
Yeah, probably. Thank you, Ashok.
It's what we call the commercial microfinance or the financial services stream. We have the huge self-help group movement in India. We have totally different models operating. Federations of self-help groups, fishermen cooperatives, etc., running their own microfinance program, micro-insurance, etc. So I somehow feel a bit disappointed that this seems to address only one stream, which some of us are a little bit, let's say, ambivalent about, because it seems to believe in the a philosophy that, okay, we can eradicate poverty through loans, and loans you can access commercially, and we can make poverty allegations so attractive that the rich people all over the world will put their money in and get a very good return.
Very good. Aware of what work you're doing. There may be some response afterwards, but we will see. If there are any more questions, we can take one more question, I suppose. Okay, there doesn't seem to be a quick response, and I want to try and keep to my promise to Rufina. So let me just make a few comments, not summing up at all. I think you've had an excellent perspective. But I think the last question, the question from Ashank, does trigger one or two points which we might want to keep in mind. Some of you may have read some time back, and recently came again in some other interview what Professor US said 2 years ago, I think, that there's no way that he can lend money below 22%. Right or wrong, that's a quote which has been put there. And I think that registers also to Ashank's question. And I think therefore the thing that many of us talk about, the fact that large, big corporate commercial India can get loans at far, far lower rates than the poor person out of the village, something which clearly is a distortion of the whole system of what we need to do. The efforts here are to see how that can come down. We heard some presentations on technology and how technology might make it both more efficient and build the scales that you can bring costs down to things that will make the interest rates lower. But there are, I think, and I think Samit pointed this out, the regulatory restraints in India which also tend to keep the costs high. So I think we've got to look at both ends, what the regulatory aspects that need to be changed, and to see how technology can help, which is the core part of today's session, to bring it down. Two other things which are very interesting, the Funo model, which is to say, look, you are in the microfinance business and dealing with people, you handle that. Let the platform, the technology be handled by an expert who can aggregate and bring to bear the best expertise on that. And I think the Funo model is a very interesting one on that. We had an international perspective coming from both Jonathan and Professor Tali on what is happening, an international look at how one is trying to make this a global phenomenon and how efforts are being on to try and see what can be shared, what can be learned, how we can spread this around the world. But I want to come back to the point that Sumit made in a different context, and I go back to a previous avatar from many decades ago, where we found this very, very starkly and clearly, and I yet believe that is true, that while loans are useful because they can, as he himself pointed out in his presentation, provide an alternative so that they don't get hugely indebted. And this came out also in Manish's presentation when he showed the kind of catastrophic or one-time loans that are required. The fact is that it's not just money. And those of my friends in this room who represent some of the more commercial VC community would recognize that when you talk of angel or seed funding, the money is only a small part of it. What is critical to make that business successful is mentoring, networking, whole host of business skills which the person may not have, in fact inevitably does not have. So money to get people out of poverty is clearly not an easy answer, which is why I wasn't surprised at all when I saw the data which was provided here, which I'd seen earlier, that yes, 50% of the people said they gained, 20% actually lost out, which is a disaster because you're widening the gap further, and 30% said no change. Because it's not money that drags people out of poverty, it's not money alone. They need a lot of things in terms of capacity building, the ability to use that money well, which is what in the commercial parlance, in the tech startup, you would call mentoring and networking, building business skills. I think this is a critical part of what is required. And therefore, clearly, one needs to work together with different dimensions of what is required in this space. The other point I want to make, which is a much broader point, and it came out from the current requirement for loans, is that in rural India in particular, a huge amount of loans are caused by health problems. And unless you can begin to tackle the health issues in rural India, just trying to work on solving the poverty disadvantage problem through money is again not going to be the best way to do it. Healthcare is becoming far more expensive. The government is, without saying so, withdrawing from free public healthcare. Private healthcare is taking over. Already private spending in health in India is huge, much bigger than so-called capitalist countries like the US. I don't know if people are aware of the figures. It's hugely more than other countries because of two reasons. The public health system doesn't work and has broken down, and it has low credibility. So even the poor, just as in the case of schools which I mentioned, tend to go to the private practitioner and not to the public health system, which is often non-existent, except on paper. And that adds to the stress in terms of money requirements, one-time requirements which are there, and then you get into a vicious cycle because they don't have money, they don't go till the sickness or the illness is very serious, and when it gets very serious, it costs a lot more money. So I think these are factors which many of you in the development sphere will be well aware of, but unless you integrate this and take a holistic view, I think we will have problems. What we discussed today is one important and I would say very key component of it, but it has to be part of a larger system. If we just look at this aspect alone, I don't think it's going to get us away from poverty. We've got to look at the totality of it and make sure that collectively we work on other aspects, not necessarily ourselves, but become a lobby to make sure that other aspects like education and health in particular, which consume a lot of the capital from rural India, are taken care of. In this case, microfinance may then become what it ideally should be, a method of helping to create assets that generate incomes and that don't get used up directly or indirectly for consumption and emergency needs. I've somewhat overrun the time limit by about 2 minutes, so sorry for that, Rufina, but I want to thank our panelists for making such excellent presentations with such brevity, and I want to thank all of you for your patience. If you have more questions, you can see if you can buttonhole any of them as you step outside. But thank you very much, and thank you.